in terms of achieving their objectives. He was also very careful in terms of avoiding what it is they will do, whether it's a ground operation or not. This is someone who is the prime minister who is defining the objective as the restoration of calm. That's very different from defining the objective as the dismantling of Hamas. So it means to me that there still is a good deal of care that is being, and judicious care that's being adopted by the Israeli government in terms of how they approach this. I think they want to avoid having that kind of major conflagration if they can. But the fact is, if a Hamas rocket hits the wrong target, kills a large number of people, you never know what could happen.
Well, but what you're suggesting, it seems to me, is that Netanyahu is simply trying to suppress this rocket fire, that he's not trying to destroy Hamas, that he's not prepared to go that far. Is that right?
That's right.
Why is he not prepared to do that?
I think for a couple of reasons. If Israel has to go in on the ground, you're going into an environment that is about as least hospitable for any army to operate in. This is a teeming environment.
It's civilians galore, right?
It's civilians galore. You will kill a lot of civilians, even if that's not your intent. You will lose a lot of people of your own. You'll face, international pressure to bring this to a halt. And it's not clear what you could achieve, even when you do all that. Having said that, there is a different situation today than existed before. Before, you had tunnels from Egypt that provided constant material and constant smuggling, which allowed the Hamas to build up this rocket capability. The Egyptians today have choked off those tunnels. That wasn't the case before. So if you can, in fact, set back their rocket-producing capability, their storage capability, which is something that the Israelis are trying to do right now, then if you bring this to an end, you're buying a whole lot more time. So the costs of trying to go in there on the ground are quite high, which is one of the reasons I think the Prime Minister is trying to avoid that. And I think there's a recognition that you can achieve something even if you continue doing what you're doing. The problem is you never know for sure, can you keep this contained? One last point. I do think if the Israelis go in, a lot of what they'll do will be what we saw, specialized operations on the one hand, and near the border they'll go after all the tunnels that Hamas has been digging to try to get into Israel, to avoid the prospect of future kidnappings.
Just one final question. You have suggested that the preoccupation in the world with other parts of the Middle East, with all that's going on there, has detracted or subtracted from the attention focused on Israeli and Palestinian peace. It seems to me that the current circumstances there, combined with what you said, mean that the prospects for anything on that agenda are really way in the background now.
You have two different worlds right now between Israelis and Palestinians. The gaps between them are enormous. Where we need to start is you stop, when this conflict ends, prevent further deterioration, and try to begin to rebuild a set of circumstances that makes peace possible down the road. It's not possible now.
Yeah, right, got it. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us today. I should tell you that just as we finished with our question to Prime Minister Netanyahu, there was another alert in Jerusalem for incoming missiles from Gaza. Should the U.S. be doing more to address the ongoing conflict in the Middle East?
Maybe he didn't have to go. Why are they keeping the media out? Is it because of the ages of the children?
Congressmen out. Yeah, well, because it's a refugee camp. How could you lower the country any more than to have refugee camps on the territory of the United States? I mean, it's like some third world country all of a sudden.
Well, when you lose, you have 7 computers simultaneously go down, the odds of which are like several billion to 1, all of them with their hard drives unrecoverable. Then I'll tell you, you get used to being able to do things like shut out the media because the media goes along. Never has anyone gotten away with this stuff. Could you imagine this at Katrina, if the government had tried to shut down the news there? This is what they do, and this is all about, in the end, about politics to some extent. Common sense would tell you this thing could be solved if people took it as a crisis and dealt with it that way.
All right, so Congressman Cuellar of Texas, a Democrat, said the same thing that you just said. He compared it to Hurricane Katrina's moment for President George W. Bush, and that now turning into what it would seem like something commensurate for President Obama. Doug?
And that's absolutely right. We have no evidence that this stem of immigrants across the border will be stopped. We have no evidence that either party will do anything. Katrina was a one-time horrific event. This continues. Both sides are playing politics, and Democrats and Republicans, as you suggest, Harris, are rightly being critical.
Sorry to interrupt, guys, but did you hear him correct his language on the immigrants and the refugees? That's very important, guys. Words do matter.
And registered and voted.
Because this is an info war. This is a word game.
Off the books labor to undercut the labor force.
Wow.
Well, that's a fact. And meanwhile, out here, you've got a huge percentage of the American people who are disgusted with both of those positions. Why can we just seal the border up? Why wasn't this done the day after 9/11? Seal the border. We spend billions securing every airplane that flies into this country. All of us go through the security.
Well, and even
grid.
more right now with the threats coming from ISIS in Iraq.
So we do that, but anybody can come in here from Mexico. Just walk right in.
Well, and that's what I'm seeing on Twitter. Before we go to a quick commercial break, something has really hit me here, and that is that it seems like American on America now. If you are against illegal immigration coming into this country with this flow of kids, estimated to be something like 90,000 by October of this year, then you're not a good American. And if you're for this, then you are. How did we get there?
Well, I tell you guys, American against American. Sorry for the interruption.
On a bipartisan way to stop illegal immigration, but to be as compassionate as we can be, consistent with our values and our norms. We're not doing it. This is a horror show down there for the children being sent and all what their parents and families are going through. It's a horror show for the border, but it tells you this: how can you have immigration reform? No one wants to close the border.
All right, we will continue our discussion. You guys are all over this tonight. I mean, you're taking everybody to task. Stay with us.
Need to be salty.
Fox crew just steps away from the firefight while the Israeli Prime Minister issues a new warning.
Well, Megan, yeah, we just heard a series of rounds of cannon fire offshore here. I'm just kind of keeping an eye out because we saw the tracer from some of those rounds, and then we heard some very loud cannon fire from further offshore, probably some large artillery. That's been the course. That's been the case of all night here, as Operation Protective Edge is now in the 11th day, and now, as we know, ground forces are here in Gaza. The Israeli military, from day one, Megan, has been talking about the possibility of a ground offensive, in particular going after Hamas's infrastructure here in Gaza, in particular the tunnels, the underground network of tunnels for the storage and transport of all these rockets that have been fired at Israel over the course of the last 11 days. So there's been the anticipation of when or if a ground offensive will happen, and now that is happening. We also heard earlier today, along with the heavy artillery fire, cannon fire from offshore, the airstrikes, the heavy artillery fire from the east coming in from the Israel-Gaza border, we heard small arms fire, just probably about maybe a mile and a half, 2 miles north of us. And by the way, we're looking north here. That is a signal that troops are on the ground here in Gaza, in northern Gaza, and then probably pushing south towards Gaza City, our location here. And I just want to keep an eye out because I just heard what sounded like small arm fire, yeah, in the background there. Just bear with me because I just want. So there's been a firefight pretty much all night. I don't know if you can see it. There's a building in the foreground here, and then you may not be able to, but probably about a mile in front of us to the north, that's where we've been hearing the small arm fire and the firefight that's been going on, most likely between, presumably, Israeli forces, ground troops, and Hamas militants. We're not sure what they're targeting in particular. We've seen a lot of rocket launches from this area in and around our location here throughout the past 6 days that we've been here, Megan, and we've also heard a lot and seen a lot of airstrikes so close to this building it jolts every time something hits. And tonight, the fighting, the strikes, the heavy artillery has been so close. I mean, you can still smell it in the air. And now we've also seen and heard from the air, I don't know if you can hear this, but the drones, the constant hum of the drones overhead. I don't know if you can hear that, but also helicopter gunships, Apache helicopters that have been firing off Hellfire missiles. So it has been a very violent night tonight here on the ground in Gaza City. Now we're in the early morning hours. It's about 4:15 by my watch. So this is going to continue through the night into the morning as now the ground offensive has started here. Megan, back to you.
John Huddy, back to you as the news warrants. Thank you. We have got more breaking news now in the investigation into this deadly plane crash in East
Strip. The ground invasion comes after 10 days of airstrikes and rocket attacks between Israel and Hamas. Fox News correspondent John Huddy live in Gaza City with the very latest. John.
Well, Greta, this is the day that we've all been anticipating, the day that the ground offensive has started, and it has indeed. First, we heard the heavy artillery fire, and now we are hearing the small arms fire, the machine gun fire in the distance. I'd have to say, if I had to guess, maybe, I don't know, 1.5 miles, 2 miles north of our location here, and that signals that troops are on the ground here in Gaza City, you know, from day one. And now, by the way, we're in day 11 here on the ground in Gaza City of Operation Protective Edge. From day one, the Israeli military says its objective is to wipe out Hamas's infrastructure, in particular going after the underground tunnels that are being used for the transport and storage of rockets, all those rockets that have been launched at Israel. That was the #1 objective from the first day. And so since then, Greta, we've been waiting to see if we see a ground offensive. Now, I told you a couple days ago, you may remember this, day before yesterday, the last time we talked anyway, I said something was brewing, something, you could feel it in the air. The IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, have been warning people to get out of their homes, to evacuate their homes and go to shelters. And that warning came over the last 24 hours, and I said, that signals that something is brewing, that something's possibly going to happen. The last time that happened was over the weekend, when we saw that intense firefight just up the coast from us that I described to you, where Special Forces troops hit the ground and raided a Hamas location. We even thought at one point we were in the crossfire with tracers going over. So over the last 24 hours, again, the IDF are warning people to get out of their homes, to go to shelters. Okay, then today we have a ceasefire. So people are thinking, well, maybe there's a window of opportunity here for peace. That slammed shut. Now we have the ground offensive. And all night, just to kind of give you the here and now, we've been seeing in the distance, and I'm going to kind of keep an eye out behind me here. We've seen cannon fire from offshore naval vessels pounding areas and locations here along the coast. We're in the western part of Gaza and Gaza City. The ground offensive is primarily coming from the east, okay, from the Israel-Gaza border on the east. That's where from the north of Gaza to the south, that's where all the ground troops have been amassed. So they're pushing in from the east and also most likely from the north as well, coming down here through Gaza City. Greta?
One quick question. Have we heard from Hamas at anything, of any of their leadership about the ground invasion?
Listen, hold on, listen. Okay, we got tracer fire behind me. Let me step out of the way. That is... That's intense artillery fire, Greta. I don't know if you're hearing that.
We can hear it.
I'm going to pause for a second. Okay, that was just cannon fire from offshore. They were hitting a location. They've been going after that location north of us along the coastline. And let me just listen. So it sounded like cannon fire and then also artillery fire probably from inland north of us. You could smell the smoke. I mean, that's how close we are at this point. And just bear with me because I want to see if I hear anything. And then we just heard, again, the small arms fire. So that's probably supporting fire for the troops on the ground just to the north of us. It's very eerie because everything's black, everything's dark, the power is out. The only time you see something is when there's, you know, when there's an explosion. And by the way, the lights in the distance, that's all Israel. That's all Israel. That's how close we are to the Israel-Gaza border. In regards to your question, have we heard anything from us? Hamas, a spokesperson for Hamas said that Israel will pay. They said Israel will pay and that they are ready for this confrontation. And hold on. There was just some flashes, explosions. And all of this, by the way, that we're hearing, if I had to guess, Greta, this is probably 2 miles, maybe 2 miles in front of us. Explosions. This area has been a very hot area since we've been here over the course of the last few days, Greta. We've seen rocket launches from here. We've heard missile strikes, some of them getting so close to this building is shook. In fact, earlier this evening, as I was reporting, I saw several flares come down probably about 300 yards to the east of the building. So that's basically to the right of the camera. And that's most likely Israeli forces putting those flares up to pinpoint and get an idea of certain locations. And I'm going to stop there because I don't want to get into too much detail, just for safety and security reasons. But a lot of this is very, very close to our location here in Gaza City, as troops are now, as I said, they're on the ground. Greta?
John, stay safe, and of course, we'll get right back to you the second anything develops, and we're in constant contact with you and your producer. Thank you. And a surface air missile to find a passenger jumbo jet out of the...
They have to get rid of these tunnels that John talked about. Today, Bill, I actually went to the border, and I saw what's left of an infiltration tunnel. 13 Hamas militants apparently made it as far as Israel. The Israelis saw them, and then they fled back into the tunnel. Some of them may have been killed. It's really not clear. But that really affected a lot of people here. This was the first infiltration there's been since 2006. And soon after this infiltration took place, there was a report of at least one other one. People here very much on edge, fearing that Hamas might make it across the border.
Sure, and then you got suicide bombers. You got all kinds of things that can happen. We might tell everybody there is a big wall that prevents terrorists on the ground from getting into Israel, but the tunnels obviously go underneath. Now, John, did you feel that you were in any danger there reporting? You had the helmet on, and I should tell the audience, the reason we have the guys on the telephone is the middle of the night, and they've been working since the morning. So I want to give them a break, and they can report from their rooms tonight, because you can't, it's dark. And we have our cameras set up so you could see the explosions. Did you feel any danger, John, that you were in?
Well, Bill, I don't know if you just saw that. There was a pretty serious explosion. There's been some looks like some cannon fire and a tremendous concussion for that. Did we feel in any danger? Well, I mean, at certain points throughout the time that we've been here, Bill, there have been a lot of missile strikes in and around the location, so close that the building shakes. And a couple days ago, when special ops teams hit the ground here, there was tracer fire that went over our head. I mean, we thought we were in a crossfire. So, I mean, we're in a safe location at this point, but anytime things get that close, I'll be, sure. Yeah,
and David, you've been in these zones a long time, and you've been in the Middle East a long time. Anything different about this?
I've seen this twice before. It's sort of like Groundhog Day with rockets, but this is a country that has clearly been terrorized by what's taking place here. Very quickly, I'll tell you something that I saw today that made a big impression on me. We were stuck in traffic. There was a terrible accident on the road. We learned that it was a fatality, and then we further learned, Bill, the reason someone died is there was a warning that there was going to be a rocket attack. This individual, as he's supposed to do, left his vehicle.
Two international crises at the same time. There's the missile attack on the passenger jet over Ukraine and the Israeli invasion of Gaza. How should the White House handle both hot spots? Insight and answers from Brookings' Michael Hanlon next. Fox News reporter John Huddy is live in Gaza. John, what's the latest?
Well, Judge, the ground offensive continues this morning here. Remember, it's very early in the morning, past 4:30 in the morning. We're going into day 3 of the ground offensive, day 13 of overall Operation Protective Edge. We've heard and seen some action to the north, some explosions in the distance, artillery fire, which indicates that, again, forces are pushing in across the Israeli-Gaza border there and also to the east. Now, overnight, yesterday, there was a lot of action, as we saw both here and also to the north. Yesterday afternoon, and we're hearing some explosions, and in the distance, actually, we're seeing a flare coming down, which indicates that possibly something is about to happen over there. In terms of what's going on the border there, the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, are going after and really rooting up the network of underground tunnels that Hamas has been using for the transport and storage of rockets. And now, as we know, they've been going into Israel. 2 militants were killed on the Israeli side when they got into a firefight, and they were dressed up as Israeli soldiers. fight, and Israeli forces found on him handcuffs and tranquilizers, indicating that possibly he was going to try to abduct Israelis. And that's been a huge concern because a lot of these tunnels come out very close to what are called kibbutzes, which are Israeli villages and communities very close to the Israeli-Gaza border. And I'm just going to keep an eye on what's going on behind us. There hasn't been too much action tonight in our location. That was not the case yesterday morning, evening, overnight hours into the morning. We were just getting pounded around here with airstrikes. Obviously, the Israeli military going after Hamas, either tunnel locations or rocket launch sites. Since we've been here the last 8 days, there have been a lot of rockets launched from this area, which is not unusual, Judge, because Hamas, as we've seen, has been firing rockets in civilian areas. So there are a lot of open fields near our location where rockets have been fired out of, and that seems to be where they've been going after, Judge.
All right, John, thanks for being with us so early in the morning over there, and take care of yourself. With me now, the ranking Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Eliot Engel. All right, Congressman, this week you said America needs to support Israel in its fight against Hamas, who you likened, by the way, to the 9/11 terrorists. Do you think that the president, by his behavior in recent days of playing pool and going to fundraisers, cracking jokes, is doing enough for Israel at this time?
Well, the president has said that the United States stands by Israel. The president said it to me just 2 days ago. He said that no country would tolerate or should tolerate these attacks, these missile attacks, day in and day out for months and years, raining in on their citizens. And of course, the Iron Dome has been very helpful in terms of saving Israeli lives, and President Obama has fully funded the Iron Dome. So I think, you know, the one thing, Judge, when people say Congress can't agree on anything, the one thing we all agree on is strong bipartisan support. It's support for Israel, because we understand that Israel shares our values and it's the only democracy in the Middle East.
You know, but the president's comment that he's deeply concerned about the civilian casualties in Hamas, given the fact that we now believe that Hamas is the one that's actually putting civilians in those sites, it seems to suggest that maybe Israel is at fault here. I mean, are you convinced that, other than his saying something, that this president is committed to Israel?
Well, I believe he's committed to Israel. Look, the Hamas terrorists, and let's remember, Hamas is a terrorist organization.
I agree.
This isn't two adversaries, two states fighting. This is a terrorist organization trying to kill as many Israelis as it can. It doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist. It has the types of views that are an anathema to those of us that live in free countries. It uses its people as human shields. If there are people being killed in Gaza, it's because they build these missiles and bombs in the midst of schools and mosques.
I think we all know that, but what should America be doing now?
Well, I think America should stand squarely by Israel, and I think we are.
How? How are we doing that?
Well, Israel, as you know, is the #1 U.S. aid recipient, and we give Israel more than $3 billion of foreign aid every single year. The Iron Dome, which is protecting Israeli lives. That's why there's only been 2 Israeli casualties.
But you know what's interesting is with Iraq, and I don't mean to, you know, what's going on in Iraq, Obama sent over 600, military guys. Not doing that with Israel and Hamas when we all agree it's a terrorist organization.
Well, I don't think Israel necessarily needs the military guys. Look, I think if there's been one constant that we've had through Democratic presidents, Republican presidents, Democratic Congresses, Republican Congresses, Israel's our ally and our friend. And I think that's been a constant, thank God, through the years.
Let's switch gears to the Ukraine. You were there just a few months ago. Critics say, again, the president isn't putting enough pressure to put Putin over and to get some access to the crash site, et cetera, et cetera. What say you?
Well, Putin's a bad guy. We knew that before. We certainly know it now.
Well, so if we knew that before, why did he do the reset button thing?
Well, I think he hoped. Look. Even
Hope springs eternal.
Even President Bush said when he looked into Putin's eyes, he saw his soul. When I look into Putin's eyes, I see 3 letters: KGB.
All right. The Obama State Department, by the way, let me just stay with Ukraine for a second. How do you think we can go in and get some of those bodies that are being ignored and you know, in the heat that they're disintegrating for the one American who's there and all of the others?
Well, I think, of course, we have to cooperate with the international community in doing this, but I think we need to galvanize the international community. I think what Putin is doing in Ukraine is obviously, he wants to resurrect the Soviet Union again.
Really?
And I think what he's doing in Ukraine is certainly against what the people of Ukraine want. The European Union finally got smart and enabled Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova to form a partnership with them for eventual entry into the EU. And I think that we need to show Putin that we stand with the people of Ukraine, and I would give the government of Ukraine military equipment and allow them to be able to defend themselves.
Real fast, do you agree with the statement by Josh Earnest this week that the world is that Obama has substantially improved the tranquility of the global community? Was he kidding?
I don't know. Listen.
Do you agree with it or not? It's yes or no. Come on, Elliot. This might
sounds like a judge. I don't know. Look, I think the president is doing the best he can. I think that we need to get tougher with Putin. We're negotiating with Iran. Sanctions brought Iran to its knees. Sanctions needs to be. We need to have more sanctions to bring Putin to his knees.
All right. Well, your lips, God's ears. We'll see. Congressman Eliot Engel, thank you so much for being with us. And coming up, the world in crisis, America's security at risk. And this administration doesn't even seem to know who the enemy is. That's next. Syria, we support rebels fighting against Iran and Russia. And in Iraq, we're working with Iran and Russia against ISIS. Do you ever feel conflicted? Mr. President, you can't have it both ways. How do you know whether to shake someone's hand or throw a bomb at them? How do you know who to invite to lunch and who to invite to an ambush? And 3, Ukraine. Mr. President, you've got to stop with that ridiculous reset button.
I think we have an excellent opportunity to reset the relationship between the United States and Russia.
And the empty threats?
And indeed, the United States will stand with the international community in affirming that there will be costs for any military intervention in Ukraine.
Here's a thought. Sanctions against Putin must be so strong and so immediate and so certain that they bring him to his knees. It looks like the weaponry used to shoot down that civilian plane was given by Russia to the separatists, or that Russia at least trained them to use it. And here's another thought. Instead of leading from behind, try getting Europe behind you on this one. We run NATO. It's our 4-star generals. It's our money. It's our intel. You've got a chance now of Europe joining you because 10 countries have lost citizens on that plane that was shot down. Just do it. And 4, Israel. Hamas is a terror organization, pure and simple. The UN may legitimize it, but it is a terrorist organization initially funded by the Muslim Brotherhood. At least the Egyptians' new president, al-Sisi, another strong player, had the courage to throw them out. And we need to assist our ally, Israel, to finish them for once and for all. And stop with the pussyfooting around and help the one ally that we have in the Middle East. And finally, to our border. Stop throwing money that we don't have at problems. Where did you learn that anyway? You can't just send money to Honduras, and you can't send immigrants under the cover of darkness whose backgrounds we don't even know, many with gang tattoos, and whose health records we don't even have, all over our country. You need to ship them out now. And if you can't secure the border, militarize it. And take that fancy pen of yours that you're always bragging about and change the law so that we don't have to keep them here for 5 years while they continue to drain us with costs of education, medication, housing, lawyers, judges, advisors, and translators. Mr. President, it's time to be a real ally to those people we need for the alleged tranquility that your press person thinks you have bestowed on the world. Another delusional conclusion. It's time to step up on the world stage to do something Reagan-esque. Yes, indeed, the cards have been dealt. And whether you like it or not, it's time to sit at the table and get in the game. If you would ante up and be the leader that America needs, then Americans will not only rally around the flag, not only put their differences aside, but they might actually cheer you on. And here's an example, in case you need it, of what a leader does.
This is not a role we sought. We preach no manifest destiny. But like Americans who began this country and brought forth this last best hope of mankind, history has asked much of the Americans of our own time. Much we have already given. Much more we must be prepared to give.
The only question, Mr. President, is you take your seat at the table. Can you rise to the occasion? Can you be the leader that America demands at this dangerous time in history? And remember one thing, your bluffing will never work in this high-stakes game. And that's my open. And now with the latest on the investigation of downed Malaysia airliner MH17, Steve Harrigan joins us in Kiev.
Judge, the international criticism continues to rise in the wake of this tragedy. Much of that criticism pointed directly at Russia. Ukraine's prime minister is saying that experts from that nation, when they reached the crash site, were actually prevented from carrying out their analysis by Russian-backed rebels, that they were even threatened with kidnapping by some of the rebels. The Malaysian transport minister saying the Russians have failed to adequately secure the site, that important evidence has been taken away or removed. And perhaps the most emotional, strongest criticism of the Russians has come from the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. The Dutch, of course, lost more than 190 people on board that plane. The Prime Minister saying Russia's President Vladimir Putin has one more chance to get it right. As far as European experts who hope to carry out an independent analysis of what exactly happened, there is a team from the OSCE on the ground here, but they continue to say after 2 days they simply have not been given full access to carry out their research on this very large crash site, something that extends for several square miles. And access, as more international experts continue to flow into the capital, Kiev, will continue to be difficult. That's because the terrain around that crash site is still a hot war zone, and even getting there from the capital of Kiev is dicey. Both sides, the Ukrainians and the Russian guerrillas, have checkpoints set up. Some of the roads and bridges in the fighting have been destroyed, and the closer you get to that crash site, the more dangerous it can get, with sounds of rockets or gunfire nearby. Certainly horrendous conditions to try and carry out any independent scientific analysis of what happened. Judge, back to you.
All right, Steve, thank you. And coming up, the world in crisis. Ambassador John Bolton reacts to my open next. And vote in tonight's Instapoll. What do you think the president does all day? Facebook or tweet me at Judge Janine.
The Malaysian Air.
All right.
I have no idea how they do that diplomatically. Militarily, it's a guarantee for mistakes and guys getting killed.
Well, and there's no question, because if you look at the map here, you see that Syria and Iraq actually border each other. And so I guess when you cross the one line, you're able to actually, you partner up with them, or in Iraq, and then you fight with them in Syria. And I guess if you're on the border, you're not really sure what you're doing. But Colonel, think about it. Almost 4,500 Americans died in Iraq and 33,000 injured, not to mention 500,000 Iraqis killed in 10 years. And now, because of a recent surge by ISIS, we've sent 600 Americans to Iraq. What is their role, and how do they complicate, or can they get caught in the middle of this mess?
Yeah, they are in the middle of the mess. The 600 guys that are there now are special operations guys. These are combat soldiers on the ground, what everyone euphemistically likes to refer to as boots on the ground. They're combat soldiers and intel people. And they're there to help coordinate airstrikes, cruise missiles, drone strikes against ISIS when ISIS comes out into the open. Right now, ISIS is hiding in towns. It's a terrorist organization. We can catch them in the open. We should kill them. The problem is that our guys are going to be with Iraqi units, part of which are Sunni sympathizers. It's very dangerous. I don't think we should have done this. We've done enough in Iraq, but we're in the middle of that there badly.
All right. And, Colonel, now I'm going to ask you to look at what you referenced a couple minutes ago, is Ukraine. All right, so we've got this problem in Ukraine, which borders Russia, and how is Ukraine impacted, and the resolution of the problem in Ukraine, and even projecting that there may be more problems with Russia fighting Ukraine, or the separatists, I should say.
Yeah. What you've got there, just south of where your hand's pointing, is where the Crimea is. That's gone. The Crimea was a tip. It's a tip. And that's never coming back. The problem is the same guy that we want to put sanctions against and talk tough to, which is Putin, is the same guy we want to coordinate with in Iraq in order to kill ISIS, and is the same guy we're going to fight against in Syria.
Colonel, can you recall?
That's upside down.
Look, you've been in the military for years and years. Can you ever remember the United States being on both sides of our enemy and on the same side of our enemy and our friend? I can't even describe it. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, like I said, it's a comedy show. The issue for me is, Judge, that we haven't seen the world this upside down since the late 1970s. It's a very, very dangerous time. And Russia, we've got slapping on both sides of their face, and therefore will not be effective. We've got to figure out where and when we got to do this, and we don't seem to be able to right now.
Well, clearly it isn't happening. Anyway, Colonel David Hunt, thanks so much for being with us this evening.
You're welcome.
All right, and coming up, violent criminals flood our border. The frightening reality that you need to know is next. And this is your last chance to vote in our Insta poll. What do you think the president does all day? Facebook or tweet me at Judge Janine.
Starting